The morning my father was buried, Seattle was wrapped in a thick, grey fog that crept in from the sound, muting the city and swallowing even the brightest spring flowers. I always wondered if weather could sense grief, if the sky knew to cover the sun out of respect. Standing at the edge of Greenwood Gardens Memorial Park, I felt as invisible as the mist rolling between the headstones. This was not how I pictured saying goodbye, not after all the years of holding out hope that my family might finally see me for who I really was. People say funerals reveal the truth about families, but I've always thought they just reinforce whatever story you've all been pretending to live. Ours was a story that had always centered around my older brother, Jason, always the golden boy, always the one with the answers. That morning, he was impossible to miss. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair slicked back with military precision. He looked like the star of a legal drama as he greeted relatives with a firm handshake and that controlled, practiced sorrow that photographs so well. The local news would have chosen him for the front page if this were the kind of funeral they covered. I watched from my little corner under a maple tree, my black dress barely protecting me from the chill, my hair pulled into a low ponytail that left my neck exposed to the drizzle. It wasn't the kind of outfit that drew compliments, just something simple I'd picked up on sale at Target during a midnight panic 3 years earlier, hoping it would one day do for a job interview. Now it was my armor. My shoes were scuffed, but clean. I clutched my phone in one hand and the program in the other, fingers numb. I could feel the stares, the little glances from people who didn't remember my name but recognized me as the other Johnson kid. To them, I was the family disappointment, the girl who dropped out of grad school, bounced between apartments, never settled down. I was 32, unmarried, working part-time at a flower shop, living in a studio with peeling linoleum and a view of the I-5. The family had always talked about me in hushed tones. Rachel, she just needs to find herself, maybe she'll land on her feet. It stung, but I'd grown used to fading into the background, letting Jason and his successful wife, their perfect little girl, and his shiny Tesla take center stage. At least the rain felt honest. From my vantage point, I could see the whole production. Jason consulting with the minister about the eulogy, our Aunt Grace directing the funeral home staff on the floral arrangements, distant cousins huddled under umbrellas, their voices low. It was all so meticulously orchestrated, like Dad's whole life, a series of planned moments, nothing left to chance. Even in death, he was determined to maintain order. My mind wandered back to childhood Sundays when Dad would insist we all dress up for church, shoe shined, hair brushed, no exceptions. He believed in appearances, in working hard and being a respectable, whatever that meant in suburban Washington. Jason always played his part perfectly, making varsity teams, earning scholarships, checking every box. I, on the other hand, was a walking question mark, more interested in painting or baking than competing. Maybe Dad worried that I'd never really fit into the world he'd worked so hard to build. The sound of Aunt Grace's voice jolted me from my thoughts. She approached quietly, as if not to startle a stray cat. Her hands were soft and cold as she squeezed my arm. "I'm so sorry for your loss, honey. Your father was a good man," she whispered. I nodded, not trusting myself to say anything. My chest felt tight, my throat sore from unshed tears. I watched Jason out of the corner of my eye. He was deep in conversation with Reverend James, probably making sure the program stayed exactly on schedule. Grace followed my gaze, her expression full of sympathy and maybe just a touch of pride. "Your brother really has everything under control," she said. "He's so responsible. You must be grateful to have someone like him at a time like this." I managed a non-committal smile, unsure how to explain that I'd felt more alone with Jason in the room than I did in my empty apartment. She leaned in, her voice dropping lower. I know funerals are expensive, but Jason's law firm has been doing well, hasn't it? He wanted only the best for your father, I can tell. Her words made me feel even smaller, as if I had no role to play in this day, this family, this world. Before I could answer, Jason strode up, all business. He barely glanced at me. Rachel, please try to look presentable during the service, he murmured, adjusting his cufflinks as if preparing for a deposition rather than a funeral. People are watching. I could feel my face flush, my jaw tightening as Aunt Grace's hand tightened on my arm in silent support. I swallowed my embarrassment and tried to steady my voice. I look appropriate for Dad's funeral, I replied, quieter than I meant to. But Jason had already turned away, thanking Aunt Grace for coming, turning on that polished charm that got him out of parking tickets and into country clubs. The service began with the slow ringing of the church bells, echoing through the wet air. I hung back, finding comfort in the anonymity of the last row, far from the eyes of people who measured worth in job titles and addresses. Reverend James spoke about my father's integrity and work ethic, about his devotion to family, the years he spent serving the city as a firefighter, the sacrifices he made for us. Jason's eulogy was poised, highlighting Dad's legacy and the importance of living up to the Johnson name. I listened in silence, wondering if anyone else noticed how easily love could become just another expectation to meet. As the final hymn faded and people began to drift toward their cars, I felt a strange sort of emptiness settle over me. Maybe it was relief that the worst was over, or dread at the idea of what came next. I stayed by the old maple tree, watching the mist swirl around the gravestones, letting the quiet soak into my bones. It was the first time all morning I felt like I could breathe. I didn't know it then, but everything in my life was about to change. After the service ended, I kept to the background, watching as mourners slowly filtered away from the open grave and the rows of folding chairs slick with rain. Greenwood Gardens was as still as I'd ever seen it, a place made for final goodbyes, with winding paths, sculpted hedges, and those long, orderly lines of headstones stretching out beneath dripping trees. I remember as a kid thinking cemeteries were haunted, but now I realized most ghosts are just memories that refuse to fade. My brother Jason was everywhere at once, moving from one group to another, shaking hands, offering the kind of reassurances that sound impressive in a crowded room but evaporate the moment you're alone. He always did have a gift for taking charge. If you didn't know us, you'd think I was just another visitor. I kept my hands busy, gathering programs, collecting empty coffee cups from the catering table, helping an elderly couple, old friends of Dad's, make their way across the gravel to their car. It was easier than facing the awkward questions people inevitably asked when they couldn't quite remember what I did for a living. Aunt Grace caught up to me again, her umbrella barely keeping the rain off her shoulders. "You doing okay, Rachel?" she asked, and for a moment I was grateful for her genuine concern. I shrugged, not sure how much truth she really wanted. Just getting through it, I guess. She hesitated, her eyes flickering toward Jason, who was now deep in conversation with the funeral director and the church pianist. "I know this isn't easy for you. You and your dad were close, weren't you?" That simple question nearly undid me. I blinked away tears and nodded. The truth was, my dad and I had understood each other best in small moments, walking the dog at sunset, fixing old radios together in the garage, sharing stories over burnt grilled cheese when Mom worked late shifts. Our connection wasn't loud, but it was real. Grace sighed. "I'm proud of you, you know. You've always had a kind heart." Not everyone has the patience to help others the way you do. She gave my arm another squeeze before heading off, and I realized that kindness, for some people, felt like enough. For others, like Jason, only grand gestures seemed to count. I watched as the guests began to thin out. There was a soft, almost reluctant energy, nobody quite sure if it was time to leave or if staying meant they cared more. Jason stood near the family plot, his wife Alison and daughter Molly beside him. Alison was dabbing her eyes with a linen handkerchief, ever the picture of grace. Molly was picking at the lace on her black dress, bored and restless. I remembered being her age, wanting to run between the gravestones and play hide and seek, not really understanding what funerals meant. Just as I turned to leave, Jason called out to me, "Rachel, wait up." There was something clipped in his tone, impatience mixed with that older brother authority he wielded so well. He walked over, hands deep in his coat pockets, gaze scanning me from head to toe. "We should talk about your living situation," he said quietly, not bothering with small talk. "What about it?" I replied, squaring my shoulders even as I shrank inside. "Dad's gone now. There's no one left to enable your lifestyle choices." His words were careful, but the disdain was clear. "You're living in a showbox apartment in one of the roughest parts of town, Rachel. You're 32. You work part-time arranging flowers. Don't you think it's time you started acting like an adult?" The urge to defend myself bubbled up, but I swallowed it. Arguing with Jason was like throwing rocks into the ocean. Every splash vanished in the waves. He kept going, his voice low but intense. "A real family contributes something. Real family builds legacies. I spent years building my law practice from the ground up, providing for my family. Dad worried about you every single day. He wanted more for you." The shame burned in my chest, but I forced myself to meet his eyes. "I've done more than you think, Jason," I said softly. "Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it isn't real." He shook his head, looking past me at the rain-soaked grass. "You've always made excuses. Always ran away from anything that took real discipline. You know Dad left you a bit of money. I just hope you don't waste it on some bohemian fantasy." I bristled at his words, knowing this was an argument I'd never win, not in his eyes. But I couldn't walk away, not this time. "You think I'm a failure because I didn't do things your way," I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. "But success isn't just about titles or houses or cars." He looked at me then, really looked, as if seeing me for the first time in years. But before he could answer, Alison called out to him, "Jason, honey, people are leaving for the reception." He glanced back at her, then at me, the conversation unfinished. I watched him go, feeling the familiar ache of being left behind. The sky had begun to clear, just a sliver of light breaking through the clouds. I closed my eyes, letting a drop of sunlight warm my face, and made a promise to myself. Today would be the last day I let anyone decide my worth for me. As I followed the others toward the parking lot, a strange sense of calm settled over me. I'd spent years letting my family's expectations define me. Maybe it was time to start living a story of my own. The drive from Greenwood Gardens to the reception was silent except for the sound of the wipers slapping the windshield. I sat in the backseat of Aunt Grace's Subaru, staring at the droplets racing down the glass, trying to anchor myself to the rhythm instead of the storm inside me. The rain had let up, but my mood hadn't. I kept replaying Jason's words over and over. each one settling in like a stone at the bottom of my stomach. The restaurant Jason had picked for the reception was a stylish new place in Ballard. White tablecloths, a wall of windows facing the canal, the sort of place Dad would have called it too fancy for our blood. Most of the family was already there, buzzing around a long banquet table loaded with sandwiches and tiny pastries. Someone had hired a jazz trio, and their music floated over the gentle hum of small talk and awkward laughter. I hovered by the door for a minute, unsure where I belonged. Allison spotted me and waved. "Rachel, over here." Her smile was bright but tight, as if holding the whole day together with sheer will. Jason stood nearby, holding court with a group of Dad's old work friends, his suit impeccable, a glass of sparkling water in hand. Even in mourning, he looked every bit the polished professional. I tried to blend in, helping the staff with plates and napkins, making sure everyone had coffee, picking up empty cups before anyone could notice. That's how I'd always survived in my family, staying useful but invisible. But as soon as I set a tray down, Jason was beside me again, his voice lowered for privacy but sharpened to a point. "You know, it's not just about appearances, Rachel," he said, his eyes scanning the room to make sure no one overheard. "It's about making Dad proud. You really think he wanted you living like this? Scraping by? You could have asked me for help, you know." I took a deep breath, forcing myself not to shrink away. "I don't need help, Jason," I said. "I'm fine." He snorted softly, then leaned in, so close I could smell his aftershave. "Fine? You live paycheck to paycheck, working in a flower shop. You know Dad worried every time your rent came due. He used to ask me if I could talk some sense into you." A wave of shame hit me, not just from his words, but from knowing how true some of them were. I had struggled. There were months when I wasn't sure I could make rent, when I lived on ramen and watered-down coffee, when I wondered if maybe I'd missed my only chance at something bigger. But I also knew that struggle was mine, and mine alone. I was building something, even if nobody saw it yet. Jason kept going, his voice harder now. "You want to be an artist or whatever, fine. But don't you think it's time you started acting like an adult? Dad gave you a little money, but don't expect it to last. And if you need real advice, maybe let someone who's actually made something of themselves help for once." The words "made something of themselves" echoed in my ears. I glanced around the room, noticing the glances from our relatives, their polite smiles tinged with pity. My aunt leaned toward another guest, whispering behind her hand. Maybe about me, maybe not. I felt a flush of heat in my cheeks, wishing I could disappear. But instead of shrinking, I straightened. For the first time all day, I looked Jason in the eye and didn't look away. "Thank you for your concern," I said evenly, but I think Dad was proud of both of us. He just showed it in different ways. Jason opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the arrival of the jazz trio's vocalist, asking if we wanted to request a song in Dad's memory. The interruption saved us both from saying something we'd regret, but the tension lingered, a low hum beneath the music. During lunch, people stood and shared stories about Dad, funny, sad, sometimes both at once. Jason delivered a moving tribute, full of polished anecdotes about Dad's career and his dedication to the Johnson legacy. I stayed silent, my hands folded in my lap, letting the waves of conversation wash over me. After dessert, Jason approached me again, holding a manila envelope. He handed it over without a word. "This is what's left of Dad's will for you," he said quietly. "Do something smart with it." Please. I took the envelope, feeling the weight of the moment, and slid it into my bag. Part of me wanted to scream, to list every sacrifice I'd made, every night I'd sat with Dad in the hospital, every bouquet I'd crafted for grieving families. But I didn't. Instead, I excused myself, stepped out onto the restaurant's patio, and let the cool Seattle air sting my cheeks. Alone at last, I leaned against the railing, the city's lights shimmering on the water below. I closed my eyes and let myself feel the ache of being misunderstood, the frustration of always being seen as a less than. For a long moment, I wondered what would happen if I simply walked away, left the city, the family, the expectations. Would anyone even notice? But somewhere inside, another voice pushed back. You are more than their assumptions. You always have been. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared above the sound, I made a quiet vow. One day, I would show them who I really was. But it would be on my terms, and in my own time. The week after Dad's funeral was one of those stretches of days where time seemed to flatten out, every hour the same as the last. I slipped back into my life in Fremont, my neighborhood nestled under the shadow of the Aurora Bridge, with its mix of vintage shops, quirky coffee bars, and the constant hum of city buses. I'd returned to my small studio apartment, hardly more than a glorified room with a kitchenette and a window facing a brick wall. The place was cluttered with houseplants and stacks of library books, mismatched thrift store mugs in the drying rack, a floral apron draped over the back of a chair. It was nothing special, but it was mine. Here, I could breathe. Every morning that week, I woke before dawn. I'd start the kettle, brew strong coffee, and spend an hour journaling by lamplight, sifting through memories of Dad, his laughter echoing in the backyard, his voice calling me a kiddo ear as we fixed up old bikes or pruned the tangled roses behind our house. Those quiet moments were mine alone, the only time I let myself truly grieve. By 6:30, I was out the door, rain jacket zipped, boots splashing through puddles on the walk to Blossom and Vine, the flower shop where I worked part-time. It was an old corner store with faded green paint, always filled with the scent of eucalyptus and fresh lilies. I'd sweep the floor, trim stems, fill vases, and listen to NPR in the background as the city woke up around me. Sometimes customers would come in looking for wedding bouquets, anniversary roses, or just a single sunflower to cheer up a friend. But most often, especially in those first weeks after Dad's death, I found myself crafting arrangements for funerals, delicate sprays of white orchids and blue delphinium, reeds of soft hydrangea, sprays of wild greenery. I liked the work, the feel of petals under my fingers, the quiet understanding that flowers could say what words never could. The job didn't pay much, but it brought me something else, a sense of purpose, and a connection to people's real stories. I saw the sorrow in their faces, the gratitude when I listened carefully and helped them choose just the right tribute. More than once, a customer left the shop with tears in their eyes and hope in their hands. It was never about the money. Still, even as I worked, Jason's words echoed in the back of my mind. You're living in a showbox. That worried about you every day. I tried not to let it eat away at me. But I couldn't help the late-night doubts. Was I letting it down? Was I really wasting my potential? That Friday, after a long shift making sympathy arrangements for a memorial in Queen Anne, I stopped by the market on my way home. I bumped into Mrs. Ramirez, who owned the bakery next door. She was a force of nature, short, always smiling, with a quick joke and a recipe for every occasion. Rachel, you look tired. Take some bread, on the house, as she insisted, stuffing a warm sourdough loaf into my bag. I thanked her and promised I'd return the favor with flowers for her daughter's birthday next week. Back in my apartment, I sat at my little kitchen table, the loaf of bread steaming in front of me, the city buzzing beyond my window. I checked my phone, a missed call from Jason, a text from Allison reminding me about Molly's school play, an email from Aunt Grace, subject line, a just checking in. I replied politely to everyone, then turned the phone off and buried myself in a sketchbook, doodling new ideas for terrariums and dried bouquets. Later that night, while washing dishes, I heard voices in the hallway. My neighbor, Mr. Kim, talking softly to his wife about their daughter's medical bills. I set aside a bouquet for them, planning to leave it at their door in the morning. A silent message, "You're not alone." That, to me, was more meaningful than any check or job title. The next day, the flower shop was buzzing with orders for a big event at a tech firm downtown. My manager, Lila, put me in charge of a team, 3 high schoolers doing weekend shifts. I watched them work, clumsy but eager, and saw in them a reflection of myself at that age. Uncertain, wanting to do well, desperate for approval. "You're doing great," I told them. Just remember, every arrangement is for someone who matters." By the end of the day, my hands were stained green, my apron damp, but I felt a kind of tired pride. As I locked up the shop, Lila handed me an envelope. "A little extra this week. The family you helped yesterday left a tip for you. They said your flowers brought them peace." I thanked her, surprised, and felt a warmth in my chest that no paycheck could buy. That evening, as I walked home beneath string lights and a pale Seattle moon, I caught my reflection in a shop window, hair a mess, jacket flecked with pollen, tired eyes. But I also saw something else, a quiet strength. A certainty that I was living my own story, in my own way, no matter who understood it. Before bed, I read through the letter that had left me, tucked away in the manila envelope Jason handed over at the reception. His handwriting was shaky but clear. "Kiddo, I know you walk your own path. That's why I'm proud of you. Don't let anyone, least of all your brother, tell you how to live. Love always, Dad." I pressed the letter to my chest, tears finally falling. I wasn't living for anyone else's definition of success anymore. The world saw me as invisible. But I knew, deep down, that I was building something only I could understand. The rain stopped the next morning, leaving Seattle glazed in watery sunlight and the scent of fresh earth. I woke before my alarm, restless with a sense of something about to shift. For the first time in weeks, the ache of grief felt a little lighter, almost as if Dad was nudging me from wherever he was now, reminding me to stand tall. Saturday was always busy at Blossom and Vine. By noon, the store hummed with energy, neighbors picking up tulips, brides choosing peonies, even a local tech CEO placing an order for the company's spring gala. I managed it all, moving between customers and employees, keeping a mental list of orders and special requests. But today, there was something different in my step, a quiet confidence I couldn't quite explain. At the counter, I checked my phone. A new email, subject line, Evergreen Memorial, Annual Meeting. The board meeting for my holding company. I smiled, thinking how surreal it would sound to anyone else. To Jason, I was just a florist. He had no idea I was the majority shareholder and CEO of Evergreen Memorial Holdings, a business I'd built from the ground up while everyone assumed I was drifting. No one in my family knew the truth. Not about the flower shops, 4 in total, scattered across the city, nor about the cemeteries, the grief counseling center, or the catering company specializing in memorial receptions. Every piece of my public life, even the tiny apartment and the second-hand car, was carefully chosen to protect my privacy and my mission. When Dad was first diagnosed, I told him everything. He'd come to my apartment one rainy afternoon, bringing takeout and the kind of tired smile he wore when the pain meds were working. He listened as I shared the story of my business, how I bought a failing cemetery outside Tacoma with my entire savings, how I learned the industry from the ground up, how I'd slowly expanded, always with the goal of bringing compassion and dignity to families in grief. By the time I finished, his eyes were shining. "Rachel, I never wanted you to follow anyone's plan but your own," he'd said, voice rough but certain. "I'm proud of you, kiddo. I just wish you told me sooner." I carried that memory like a shield, especially in moments when Jason's criticism threatened to pull me under. That afternoon at the shop, a family came in, parents and a young boy, their eyes red, voices hushed. They were choosing flowers for the boy's grandmother's funeral. I knelt beside him, let him pick the color, and listened as he described her favorite garden in Spokane. "She loved yellow roses," he whispered. I made sure his bouquet was just right, added a sprig of rosemary for remembrance. His father squeezed my hand, tears in his eyes. "Thank you for listening. You made this easier." It was moments like these that reminded me. My work mattered, even if nobody in my family understood. When closing time finally came, I counted the day's receipts and tidied the shop. My phone buzzed with a text from Allison. Jason wants to meet for coffee. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. at the old place. I stared at the message for a long minute. Something in the air told me this wasn't just another lecture. I agreed, curiosity and nerves mixing in my chest. That night, I prepared for the meeting in my own way, not with a new outfit or a speech, but by reviewing my business documents. I slipped the property deed for Greenwood Gardens Memorial Park into my purse, along with a folder outlining Evergreen Memorial's holdings and the scholarship fund I'd started in Dad's name. I had never planned to use any of this to prove myself, but after years of being misunderstood, I was done hiding. The next morning dawned bright and cold. I arrived early at the tiny Capitol Hill coffee shop Jason and I used to visit in college. The place hadn't changed, same faded art on the walls, same smell of burnt espresso and fresh pastries. I sat by the window, folder in my lap, watching as Jason pulled up in his gleaming silver Tesla, checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, and strode inside. He ordered his usual, black coffee, no sugar, keep the cup, and sat down across from me. For a moment, we just watched each other, the years of rivalry and misunderstanding hanging between us. He cleared his throat. "Rachel, I wanted to talk. I've been thinking about what I said at the funeral. Maybe I was too harsh." I said nothing, just nodded. He seemed smaller today, less certain, his confidence rattled by something he hadn't shared yet. He pressed on, voice softer than usual. "It's just, I don't get it. How do you manage, living the way you do? Don't you want more?" I looked down at my hands, then back at him. "Jason, you see what you want to see. You never asked about my life, not really." He frowned, and for the first time I saw a crack in his armor. I slid the folder across the table. "You should read this." Jason hesitated, then opened it. I watched his face shift, from confusion to disbelief to awe, as he read through the property deed, the business statements, the list of employees and families we'd helped each year. His voice shook. This is you?" I nodded. It's all me. The flower shops. The cemeteries. The scholarships. Even the catering for Dad's reception. I built this, Jason. And I did it not because I had something to prove, but because I wanted to help people the way Dad did. He was speechless. For once, he had nothing to criticize, nothing to dismiss. Only the truth, quietly unfolding between us, as sunlight streamed through the window and settled on the table. Jason stared at the documents in silence, his eyes moving slowly from line to line as if willing the words to rearrange themselves into something he could accept. Outside, the city bustled, buses roared past, cyclists zipped through puddles, but in that little coffee shop, time seemed to freeze. The only sound was the quiet clatter of cups and the hiss of the espresso machine. I watched him try to fit the new version of me into the box he'd constructed over a lifetime. He looked up at last, his face a complicated knot of pride, embarrassment, and shock. I don't understand. How did you do all this? Why didn't you tell anyone? I folded my hands, letting myself feel the weight and relief of finally sharing my truth. Because I needed to build it for the right reasons, not to impress anyone or to chase a title, but to help people and to do it my way. Dad knew. I told him when he got sick. He helped me plan his own memorial, down to the last rose bush. I managed a small smile. He said I'd found my calling, even if no one else could see it yet. Jason opened the property deed for Greenwood Gardens again, reading the address. You own the cemetery where we buried Dad? His voice cracked with disbelief. All 200 acres. Evergreen Memorial owns that land, plus 6 other cemeteries, 2 funeral homes, a monument company, and the counseling center downtown. I watched as the realization hit him. You know the flower shop? I own that too. And the catering company that did the food for the reception. I wanted to make sure families felt cared for, not just processed. Jason leaned back, his confidence shaken. I could see him replaying every condescending word, every family dinner where he'd written me off as a failure. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. But you live in that tiny apartment, he said, the last defense of his old worldview. I shrugged. It's easier to work late. My real home is a farmhouse just past the main entrance to Greenwood Gardens. You probably drove by it every time you visited Dad's grave. He covered his mouth, trying to hide his shock, but the damage was done. I felt a fierce, quiet satisfaction, not vindictive, but rooted in finally being seen. All these years, I thought you were lost, he said. You were just doing something I never could have imagined. I nodded, gentler now. You never asked. And honestly, I let you believe it. It was easier to do my work without explaining myself all the time. He flipped through the folder, pausing on a letter from Forbes, inviting me to speak at a conference for young entrepreneurs transforming legacy industries. He looked at me in awe. You're really a CEO. I let out a small laugh. Titles don't mean much. What matters is the families who trust us with their hardest days, and the people we employ, groundskeepers, counsellors, drivers, florists. Dad understood that at the end. For a moment, Jason just sat there, the old arrogance washed away. He seemed smaller, but also more real than he'd been in years. He finally asked, why did you let me think you were struggling? I looked out the window, choosing my words. Because families trust me with their memories, their grief. I needed to earn that trust for real, not by chasing your version of success, but by serving people when they needed it most. I couldn't do that if I was always trying to prove something to you or Mom. Besides, Dad knew. That was enough. The silence stretched, full of things neither of us had ever said aloud. Then Jason's voice was unsteady, almost childlike. "You're not the one who needs help, are you?" I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Not today." He put the folder down, shaking his head. "Dad would be so proud." I'm sorry, Rachel, for all the times I made you feel less than you are." I let the apology hang in the air, letting it settle, letting the old wounds begin to close. We all wanted to make him proud. We just took different roads to get there. Just then, my phone buzzed, a message from one of the counselors at Evergreen's Grief Center. A family needed help with a memorial service that afternoon. I looked back at Jason, feeling a sense of purpose bloom in my chest. "I need to go," I said. "There's a family waiting for me." "But, do you want to see what I've built? Come with me. I'll show you the gardens, the chapel, the center. You can meet the team." Jason hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that. Maybe I have more to learn from you than I thought." We left the coffee shop together, stepping out into the bright Seattle morning. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of hope, an ending, and a new beginning, written not in money or titles, but in the quiet work of compassion and connection. As we walked down the street, shoulder to shoulder, I realized something profound. My success was never about proving myself to my family. It was about honoring my father's legacy in my own way, and maybe, just maybe, building a new kind of family for both of us. The drive to Greenwood Gardens felt different this time, as if every familiar turn was suddenly brighter, every street more alive. Jason sat in the passenger seat, his silence deep and thoughtful, the kind of quiet that happens when old beliefs are falling away and new truths are taking root. I glanced over at him a few times, searching for signs of the brother I remembered from childhood, the one who used to race me down these very streets on our bikes, who once carried me home after I crashed and scraped my knee. As we pulled through the gates, Jason craned his neck, taking in the rolling lawns, the marble archways, the clusters of dogwood and cherry trees in bloom. Sunlight caught on the new plaques I'd installed for this year's remembrance event. Families wandered between the rows of stones, leaving fresh bouquets, some pausing to share quiet stories. It didn't look like a place of endings. It looked like a place where love lingered and life, somehow, kept growing. We parked near the chapel. "I didn't realize this was here," Jason admitted, voice low. "It's beautiful, Rachel." "It's home," I said softly. A groundskeeper named Miguel waved as we walked up the flagstone path. "Morning, Ms. Johnson. The Wilsons are here for the 3 o'clock. Want us to use the Rose Garden Chapel?" He nodded at Jason, recognizing a family resemblance. "Perfect, thank you, Miguel. Acoustic guitars for the service, remember?" I smiled as he nodded and hurried away. Jason watched the interaction, surprise flickering in his eyes. "They respect you," he said quietly. I shrugged, unlocking the door to the chapel. "They know I care." And I do. Inside, sunlight streamed through stained glass, splashing the pews with color. I showed Jason the memorial wall, where hundreds of families had left messages for loved ones. "Every name here means a story." We try to honor each one, not just with flowers and stones, but with attention and real care. We walked the grounds, stopping to greet staff and families along the way. At the Grief Counselling Centre, I introduced him to Linda, our lead counsellor. Rachel's changed everything here, Linda told Jason. When she started, people thought this business was just about money and land. Now, we're part of the community. We help people heal. Jason seemed humbled, listening as Linda explained our scholarship fund for students entering the funeral services field, the free support groups for widows, the children's programs. I saw the questions in his eyes as he pieced together all that I had built in silence, away from the world's gaze. Back outside, we passed a young couple laying tulips on a grave, and an elderly man reading poetry to a marble bench dedicated to his wife. Jason stopped, overcome by the scene. I never thought about this side of it. About what families really need. I let him sit with that truth for a while. We continued to the farmhouse, the one he'd driven past so many times without realizing it was mine. Inside, it was warm and filled with light, books stacked on the windowsills, fresh flowers on every table, family photos sharing space with sketches for new garden layouts and programs for upcoming memorials. He ran a hand along the mantel, pausing at a photo of Dad, dirt on his hands, grinning beside me as we planted the first rose bush 3 years ago. He came out here a lot, I told Jason. In those last weeks, he wanted to see what we were building. He even helped plan his own memorial, wanted it to feel personal, not just official. Jason sank onto the couch, shaking his head in wonder. All this time, I thought I was the one who kept the family together. I didn't even know what you were doing. I joined him, letting the comfortable silence stretch. You did what you thought was right. We just saw the world differently. He looked around, taking in the house, the garden visible through the windows, the sound of wind chimes outside. You know, Dad would have loved this place. He always wanted to build something that lasted. He did, I said, voice thick with emotion. And so did I. Just in my own way. After a while, Jason spoke again, quieter now, the last of his defensiveness melting away. I judged you, Rachel. I kept telling myself you were lost, but really, I just didn't understand you. I never even tried. I shook my head. We all carry stories about each other. It's easy to miss what's right in front of us. He laughed, a little shakily. I have clients with less responsibility than you. I had no idea you were running an organization like this. I smiled, a real one, the kind I hadn't shared with Jason in years. Now you do. And if you want to help, there's always work to be done. A lot of families need legal guidance, trusts, wills, estate planning. People who know what compassion looks like. He looked at me. Surprised. You'd want to work with me? After all this? Of course, I said, reaching for his hand. We're still family. Dad would have liked that. We sat together for a while longer, watching the sun settle over the gardens. For the first time, the quiet between us felt like possibility, not regret. We left the farmhouse together, walking the gravel path back to Greenwood Gardens Chapel as the sun dipped low, gilding the lawns and headstones in soft gold. Families were already gathering inside, the air alive with quiet laughter, the scent of coffee and home-baked cookies mingling with lilies. I could feel Jason's hesitation as we stepped through the doors, dozens of pairs of eyes turning our way. But this time, I didn't shrink from the attention. I carried myself taller, the years of invisible effort finally seen, my story no longer a secret. Jason trailed just behind, absorbing every conversation, every hug, every nod from the staff and guests who recognized him, now as my brother. At the entrance, Allison met us with a relieved smile. "There you are. Everyone's been asking for you, Rachel." She pulled me into a quick hug, then glanced at Jason, reading his expression. "You okay?" He nodded, still slightly dazed. "I think so. I have a lot to catch up on." Inside, the chapel buzzed with people that had touched in life, neighbors, old friends from the firehouse, teachers, and colleagues. Yet there were others too, families I'd served through Evergreen Memorial, people who had never met Dad but knew me from their own hardest days. Near the front, a mother I'd once helped arrange a memorial for Court My Iron came over, her young son in tow. "Rachel, I just wanted to say thank you again for everything you did for my father. When we didn't know how to cope, you made it feel possible to remember with love, not just pain." The boy handed me a crown drawing, flowers and sunlight, the words "Thank you, Miss Rachel" written carefully in block letters. My throat tightened. "Thank you, Jack. This means so much to me." Jason watched, blinking quickly, moved by what he was seeing. More people came, an elderly man whose wife's bench would help dedicate, a newlywed couple who'd lost a parent and found comfort in the gardens. Each one brought memories, gratitude, stories of hope and healing. For years, I'd thought of my work as quiet, unseen. But now, it was clear, this was community, built one small kindness at a time. A judge from King County approached Jason, shaking his hand. "Your sister is a remarkable woman, Mr. Johnson. When my mother passed, she organized everything with such compassion. It made all the difference." Jason looked at me with new eyes, pride growing where once there had only been doubt. As the reception wore on, Jason and I moved among the guests together, no longer two people on opposite sides of a family divide, but partners in something larger. He listened to the stories, offered condolences, even asked a few legal questions, curious and open in a way I'd never seen before. Allison, seeing the change, smiled at me over the heads of the crowd. "You two look like a team," she whispered. "Dad would have loved this." We gathered near the buffet, sharing a plate of Mom's lemon bars and Dad's favorite cinnamon rolls, recipes I'd made with the catering team, just as he liked. People took turns raising a glass to Dad's memory, but more and more, the toasts drifted to stories of kindness, small miracles, the ways loss had become bearable through connection. Near the end of the evening, Jason turned to me, voice soft. "I used to think legacy was about money, property, keeping a family name alive. But you built something real, Rachel. You gave people comfort when it mattered most. That's more than I ever did behind a desk." I shook my head. "You built a life, a family. There's honor in that, too. We just show love differently." Dad saw it in both of us, even when we couldn't see it in each other. He nodded, quiet for a long moment, then squeezed my hand. "I'd like to help, if you'll have me. Legal advice, paperwork, whatever you need. It feels good to be part of something that matters." A wave of relief and gratitude washed over me. I'd like that. There's always more to do. As the last guests prepared to leave, I made my rounds with armfuls of leftover flowers, giving them to families to take home, a tradition I'd started, making sure nothing beautiful went to waste. Each thank you, each smile, felt like a piece of Dad's spirit living on through this work. By the chapel doors, Jason lingered, looking out at the gardens where the sun was setting, a gentle breeze rustling the rose bushes. He's buried in a place you built, surrounded by people you've helped. That's not just a business, Rachel. That's a legacy. Tears shimmered in my eyes, but they were happy ones. Our legacy, I corrected gently. You're still my brother. We're still a family. And if you want to help families find peace, you're always welcome here. We stood together in the doorway, watching the sky fade from gold to violet, the world settling into evening. For the first time, I felt completely at home, in my work, in my family, and in myself. As the last guests departed and the light faded from the chapel windows, a quiet peace settled over Greenwood Gardens. The staff bustled through final cleanups, laughter and tired goodbyes echoing off marble and glass. Jason and I lingered by Dad's grave, a simple granite headstone nestled in a circle of newly planted roses. I knelt to adjust a flower arrangement left by a young girl and her mother, then sat beside Jason on the low stone bench, the hush of the evening enveloping us. For a while, neither of us spoke. The cemetery was never more beautiful than at twilight, shadows growing long across the lawns, petals shining in the dusk, families pausing for last words or quiet prayers. For the first time since childhood, Jason and I felt not like rivals, but like siblings again, bonded by shared love and loss. He broke the silence first. Rachel, I have to ask, did it hurt? All those years when I tried to change you, when I looked down on your choices? I took my time answering, staring at the sky turning deep blue above the garden. Of course it hurt, I said gently. But it also made me sure. I built all of this not to prove you wrong, but to prove myself right. I needed to know that my choices mattered, that I could help people in my own way. Your doubt was hard, but it made me stubborn and strong. He nodded, remorse in his eyes. I'm sorry. I wish I'd understood sooner. I wish I'd asked what you were really building instead of assuming you were lost. I offered him a small, forgiving smile. You cared, even if it came out all wrong. We both wanted to make Dad proud. We just took different roads to get there. Jason leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looking around the peaceful grounds. You know, when I was a kid, I always thought being a Johnson meant winning, making money, earning respect, building something people admired. I never thought about how much courage it takes to build something nobody sees. To work in silence, for the sake of strangers. Dad understood, I said. He always believed in working with your hands, making a real difference. That's what he was teaching us, even if we didn't know it. A gentle breeze rustled the roses, carrying the faint scent of new growth and old memories. I reached into my bag and handed Jason a folder, the plans for the Robert Johnson Memorial Scholarship. I started a fund in Dad's name, I explained. It'll support students who want to work in funeral service, counseling, or community care, kids who might not have the money or support to chase their dreams. Jason's eyes shone with pride as he flipped through the paperwork. He would have loved this. Helping people find meaning in their work, it's the best kind of legacy. We sat in silence, letting the magnitude of all we'd survived and all we'd built together settle between us. When the sun was almost gone and the grounds glowed in twilight, Jason finally spoke. So what now? He asked, uncertainty and hope mingling in his voice. I smiled, feeling light and certain for the first time in years. Now, we keep going. We help more families. We grow the business, but not just for money. For kindness, for healing. If you want to join me, there's a place for you here, not just as my brother, but as my partner. He stood and offered me his hand, and I took it. We walked back to the farmhouse, passing by families who had found comfort among the gardens, the last visitors saying their goodbyes. I saw the future reflected in the faces around us, not just the pain of loss, but the warmth of community, the power of compassion. In the months that followed, Jason joined Evergreen Memorial as our in-house counsel. Together, we expanded the scholarship fund, opened a new grief support group for teens, and started hosting educational seminars for families navigating end-of-life planning. Our staff grew, but so did our sense of purpose. The family business wasn't just a name on a sign anymore. It was a living, breathing legacy woven from the courage to care. At home, our relationship transformed, too. Sunday dinners were full of laughter and stories. Jason and Allison's daughter, Molly, would spend weekends learning to plant tulips and help make bouquets for families in need. I saw in her the same curiosity and kindness that Dad had nurtured in me, a reminder that the best gifts are passed down not in bank accounts, but in the gentle way we treat each other. On the anniversary of Dad's passing, we held a community remembrance day. The chapel was filled with music, photos, tears, and laughter. Families who had once come to us in grief returned to share hope, to plant roses in the gardens, to remember together. Jason stood beside me as we dedicated a new bench in Dad's honor, inscribed with words he used to say, "The work is the point. Kindness is the legacy." As twilight descended, Jason hugged me tightly. "Thank you for not giving up on me, or on this family." I squeezed his hand. "Thank you for finally seeing me." We stood together in the golden glow, hearts light, knowing that legacy isn't measured by wealth or trophies, but by the love we offer, the hands we hold, and the lives we change. Dad would have been proud, not just of what we'd built, but of who we'd become. And as the stars appeared above Greenwood Gardens, I realized I was proud, too.